I studied biology and gender studies, and I worked at the Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender, and Reproduction. And that was a really different experience than going to law school. In biology, there are right and wrong empirical answers. In gender studies, there's different theories that you bandy about with each other, but it's often with fairly like-minded people. And in both subjects and in my work at the Kinsey Institute as an academic, there's sort of a baseline set of assumptions you can make when you're communicating with other scholars in your field. But in the law, you don't do that at all. I assume that people I'm talking to are really intelligent, but when you do that in the law, you have to assume they're really intelligent and excited, and as excited as you are, to dive into the very premise of what you're talking about and to push back against the very foundation of what you believe and think. And if you disagree with them, you need to respect that core belief that they have and possibly, try to work around it in investigating the cognitive biases or heuristics they might have used to reach their conclusion, to see if that might be a way for you to help them change their mind or evolve on an issue. I'm a litigator at Lambda Legal. What we do is something called impact litigation. So that means that we try to take a bad law or policy that's broadly affecting in a disparate way the LGBT community or the people living with HIV and AIDS, and we try to change it through a legal challenge. And recently I've been doing a lot of meetings with law enforcement task forces that specifically try to target youth who are involved in sex trafficking. And they try to pull these youth from those bad situations and prosecute the people that are trafficking them. And the goal is to protect those young people and give them the resources they need to succeed. But the actual outcomes that we see on our side, especially as applied to LGBT youth, is quite the opposite. They're being pulled out of situations that might be stable for them or might be safer than their home life, and they're not getting any resources. And so in that situation, you sort of have to push back slowly at their process to highlight for them where the gaps are. So I say, okay, you can't give them resources, but you said that your goal here was to improve their situation and help them and give them resources. And they said, well, we have partners for that. So they work with Child Protective Services, who can only provide so much. And I said, okay, so what's Child Protective Services' goal? They said to return the youth to their home. But for our youth, that's not necessarily a desirable outcome, because LGBT youth are often in these situations because they don't have a safe home to be. So what happens when you can't send the youth home? And they said, well, then they end up in foster care. And I said, okay, so for LGBT youth, foster care is not necessarily a safe place for them to be. There's a lot of bullying and harassment and sexual violence. What happens there if they're not successful in foster care? I said, well, a lot of these youth that have been trafficked end up acting out or offending. So then they end up in juvenile justice. It was an aha moment, and if you come at it from a place where their viewpoint is valid, and we know that their viewpoint has worked in the past, then it's not so abrasive to kind of pull the layers away. And we can have more meetings going forward instead of being shut out.